Hello, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're coming from in the world. I always say all the good mornings and good afternoons, but no, welcome wherever you come from today for this episode of Trend Detection Live. It's a pretty sort of special episode today because it's actually, for the people who listen to the recording afterwards, it's going to be the last episode on our current channel. So we're actually moving to Siemens FM podcast channel, so you can catch up with all the episodes there moving forward. But I'm really delighted to say we've actually got Sensei co-founder on here today. What better way to finish one chapter and start a new one? So we've got Rob Russell here, who I'll just ask to introduce himself before we sort of dive into the topic today, which is all around predictive maintenance in the real world. So Rob, over to you.
Yeah, hi now, thanks. And hi to everybody who's watching. I'm Rob Russell. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Sensei, along with three others. And it's good to be here today, and nice to be as part of our last Sensei branded podcast.
Exactly. And so our topic today is it's actually something Rob presented about very recently, actually. So it's all about predictive maintenance in the real world. So I guess the best place to start is really what did you mean by that? What's the story behind that sort of title, Rob, or topic?
Well, it's really bringing forward the fact that I feel as Sensei, as a company and as a product, we've held hard and fast to our vision, and we've managed to actually create this single product that works across multiple sectors. Works across multiple asset types, and it's out there being used on thousands of machines globally. So what we do find, and it's back to some of the things you maybe talked about in previous sessions like this with others, is that you've got a high percentage of projects that fail in this area, but we're sort of breaking through that and showing that along with the technology and the sort of methodologies that we bring. We actually are bringing this through to reality, and we're way beyond proof of concept and pilot phases in what we're doing.
Yeah, so I guess just diving into that. So why focus on sort of a scalable approach? Because I think maybe some people have a misconception that predictive maintenance is great. You can just monitor that one really important asset and make sure it's you can monitor it and see everything that's happening with it. But why is that not the best approach? And to predictive maintenance, let's say.
Yeah, well, part of the seeding of the thoughts that we had when we were first creating the vision for Sensei was realizing that there's a lot of different point solutions that are out there for like condition monitoring data and providing predictive maintenance capability, but the end user doesn't want to log into 10, 20, 30 different apps during his day. He wants one single sort of view. Some people call it one single pane of glass, right? And it was about how do you actually develop something that can do that and work across all the machine types in a factory. It's quite easy for teams to react very much to the requirement that maybe a sales guy would walk in the room with and saying, okay, I've got this customer that's got this machine type and he needs a solution for this. And that's great. You go off and develop a solution for that machine type. And then, a few weeks later, that same sales guy's coming back in going, now the customer's asking about his other machines. What do we do? And you're like, oh my gosh, we have to repeat this process again. And we very much wanted to break that cycle. And that's what's driven us through the last, whatever it's been, like 8-9 years now at Sensei.
And so how did you and your sort of co-founders approach that problem then? So you knew the problem was at scale, and that's one that needed to be solved. So where do you even start, focusing on that?
Yeah, and it was breaking some of the thought processes about the type of things that people thought the market would actually need in a solution, but focusing very much on coming up with something that's very generalized, and then bringing that together with the understanding that it's really a decision support system. Right? There's a lot of hype and aspirations out there for things to be like super prescriptive in their output. But generally, our focus is about scaling humans and the human capability. And then another aspect that's been really key is when we're thinking about the analytics perspective, realizing that if we can actually break this down to be an engineering problem that is about using AI and machine learning to look at condition monitoring data at scale, then what you're able to do is understand that there's huge amounts of commonality in the data that you actually want to monitor. So if we make sure that we focus on getting the right data transformed before it comes to our system, that allows us to have very, very general analytic capabilities that do truly scale across machine types.
Actually, well, now you mentioned data. Data is obviously a very essential in some ways to the story. But how do we as Sensei help transform users' data? Because it obviously comes in different states, different formats. I guess people have different maybe misconceptions about whether their data is good or bad. Good or bad, I'll say, because there's even that's not clear. But so yeah, how do we help with that process, or help customers identify good and bad, let's say, data?
Yeah, and it really is bringing it back to the core domain that we're trying to work within, and you know, a lot of our team that are customer facing have backgrounds in reliability engineering and really understand what it is we're trying to achieve. And it's no different than you know, if you were to scale the problem with humans, you would need something in the data for the humans to look at that would change with the condition of the machine. And that's fundamentally no different for what we want to bring into the algorithms. So when we're talking about data, from our perspective, good data is good quality condition monitoring data. And that could be as simple as, you know, peaks or in current signals when motors are starting up. It could be vibration levels. And we go to great lengths really to advise and educate customers and the wider market on this, and you know, I spend a lot of my time sort of breaking some of those myths about the fact that, you know, if you throw enough data at enough CPUs, some magic will happen. Magic doesn't exist, right? It's still fundamentally a technical and an engineering activity we're doing.
And in terms of that data, I was just thinking, is it a case that we have people approach us who've got data and they've attempted projects and have just we talked about project failure before. Is that sort of the case that they've sort of hit a brick wall before? Because I think I've touched on in the past and on the podcast about, I've had discussions before about talking to various different leaders in manufacturers who are collecting lots of data, but then they don't sort of seem to know what to do with it. It's like Industry 4.0 told me to collect all this data. Now, what do we do? What's the next step? And maybe they take some missteps along the way. Is that sort of your experience too?
Yeah, and so sometimes you know, the clients that we come across that have already tried something and then failed, they can be the best ones in some cases because they've got a much more grounded approach. They understand what really is possible and how hard some of this can be, and why, you know, you need to be holding very tight to that vision and the type of thing that we do at Sensei, and thinking, you know, you don't necessarily always have the internal skills to do this. You know, sometimes I've been in meetings where I've had clients sit across the table saying for them it's a build or buy situation, and I say, well, probably it's going to be a buy or buy, right? You're going to build it, you're going to realise it's very difficult to build, very difficult to maintain, but you'll be talking to me in 2 years' time, right?
Exactly. So again, it's something that's very difficult. It's something I guess it's fair to say it could be replicated on a per machine basis, but if you want to scale, then it's just not something. Well, clearly, it's not something you can just replicate, is it? That's where you need sort of expertise.
Yeah, and it's being able to have that focus. If you're a business focusing on a certain type of manufacturing, it's very hard for you to maintain the momentum in a department that's developing, a very specific application for predictive maintenance. You wouldn't be doing that for all sorts of other aspects and tooling and systems within your company. I think it's just the fact that this is an ever-evolving market right now, and there's still some uncertainty, and people still want to, maybe have control, or don't believe that what they need is actually out there in the market, and end up feeling they've got to build it themselves. And that's part of the title of today, predictive maintenance in the real world. You don't need to build it yourself. We have the solution here, and it's well proven.
Yeah, no, exactly. And actually, in terms of what are your views, Rob, in terms of, the markets develop? Do you think predictive maintenance has gone mainstream? Is it fair to say, or is it still not quite there yet? Or even on a sort of a deeper level, is it fully understood by the market, the industry? I guess there's a few questions in there.
Yeah, I do feel it's right on the cusp. If it's not gone mainstream, it's very much about to. There's every major organisation out there is talking about this as a use case. Everywhere I turn, it's we see demand for it. Probably now it's just overcoming some of the more nearby type of challenges. It's getting maybe acceptance of cloud where we are is key. But that understanding, one of the things that we're noticing, different sectors have got different levels of maturity within reliability engineering. Some of those heavier industries where they've had dedicated reliability engineers for years, they're moving much faster, whereas some of the industries where it's much sort of lighter machines, maybe they're used to using a lot of subcontract organisations to help them with maintenance. They don't necessarily have that ingrained sort of discipline within their organisation. But this is where you can leverage that with technology.
And who are the key sort of stakeholders driving this? And I guess it differs by organisation. I'm just interested whether it's sort of an IT-led thing, or is it generally an OT? If we go IT-OT, is it a bit of both? Is it one or the other in your experience?
What we're finding a lot, there's a lot of Industry 4 digital transformation teams out there that are looking to build on top of the various platforms or digital operating systems that they've got in their plants, and they're creating a reasonable amount of pool. We find though that the ideal area to have the demand from is much more on the maintenance, the engineering, and the shop floor side. These are the people with the real KPI that you're trying to solve. So you're trying to ensure that their uptime's there, their maintenance budgets are under control. They've got control of all of their spares and provisioning, because they're subservient to the production manager, right? So they've got metrics that they are trying to ensure that the factory's running optimally, but also probably they've got metrics that are that they're being measured against by their CFO, right? They've got specific budgets. So it's really trying at the end of the day to get connections through to the team who's going to actually benefit directly from this. But there is a big drive at the moment that we see coming from, IT, OT type of people that are involved in digital strategy that are looking for the right product to lay on top. But it sometimes can help, and sometimes it can delay, because you still need to get to the end user and bring them on board as soon as possible.
Exactly. I'm sure there's plenty of examples of project, not Sensei, but outside of Sensei as well, where stakeholders haven't been brought in at a certain stage, or they're brought in a very late stage, and they're what's going on? What's going on here? We haven't had any input on this. So I guess it's all about getting the buy-in and everyone on board as early as possible in terms of, how it can benefit the organisation and, like you said, the end user as well, which is often forgotten, I guess, a lot in terms of software selling.
No, exactly. That's right. And so sometimes if you're not careful, at times you end up conducting some sort of science experiment, and it's all about, experimenting to test the, I don't know, like so some people turn around and say to me about, like the robustness of the algorithm. I can sit and I can show you success cases all day from various customers. We're quite satisfied that that's there. It's more about understanding how you're actually going to use it, how you're going to adapt your work processes and your ways of working. Yeah.
I think that's one of the, a little bit biased, but one of the impressive things about Sensei, how we help, and I was talking to one of our colleagues the other day about how we help capture success and then provide that information to, say, the key users or champions to be able to, if they do have to report up, as they often do, metrics, that we actually support them in that process as well. Because obviously it benefits both sides, of course, but I think that's a really, really, really key aspect of it all, because then that leads into further scaling, further, more assets and further successes, of course, as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the big differentiators in what we do. We've created a lot of technology, but we actually wrap that with proper delivery and onboarding processes, and importantly, a really strong ethos on customer success and customer success management, and that's even baked into the application as well. Like you say, we've got methods that we capture that through of our workflow, because we all know at some point somebody's going to actually want to understand what are the benefits. What is that return on investment that's being achieved, and whether it's avoiding downtime, whether it's removing maintenance, whether it's saving on spare parts and labour costs. These all go together and build up that internal business case, because most projects that we start, you're not doing it on entire factories or entire organizations. You're doing it in a scaling way where you maybe do one production line, but that really is still part of the sales process. And what you're trying to do there is help the internal stakeholders gather the evidence they need then to justify the plant-wide scaling. And
then I guess the next part of the story, so if you jump ahead, so away from production lines and then a full plant, so how does how can, I mean, in a lot of different ways it's so culturally, technically, but get into the scalability part, so to other plants, because often plants work very sort of independently, have their own management team and stuff. So how does Sensei, how do we help connect those dots? Obviously in collaboration with a client.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably where it is important that, so some of those people I was talking about earlier, the people with these Industry 4 digital strategies are, at the hub of what's happening, and they can actually greatly assist in developing the processes where you can have standard ways of onboarding. We see this with a lot of clients that they've got their own internal systems, their data historians, their cloud platforms, and their time series databases. But being able to have a central team that can share best practice across various departments within a single factory or across various factories, we're seeing evidence there that the solutions being developed that are not requiring each area to code things up or create configuration. There's a few clicks in a web UI, and then there's data starts to stream through into the Sensei app. So that's an area where these digital transformation teams really come into their own in helping having that sort of scalable connectivity.
And again, it's what feeds into that is similar to we both visited a customer yesterday who have sort of integrated Sensei with the system they use in their organisation, so sort of the front end system. So I guess that's that's part of the success, isn't it? Where Sensei can help. It doesn't have to be the platform if not required, but actually it can help enhance an internal platform equally the same and fit into that naturally into that workflow as well.
Yeah, and that's a real key thing. I mean, we've always been sort of humble enough to understand that what we're doing is only one aspect in the tools and the systems required from a reliability engineer's perspective. And we've always maintained, you have to have an open architecture so that things can be integrated into the processes that clients have. So, the most typical example is being able to take our output and have that presented within a maintenance management system. But the sort of thing that you were talking about and that we saw yesterday was more high-level dashboarding that's used within sort of maybe like morning stand-ups for a maintenance team, or for maintenance teams to do handover between shift changes. But it's more than just bringing data from the predictive maintenance area. You've got lots of other data sources that you have to bring together. And again, it's back to that whole thing about decision support. Somebody has to start understanding how to prioritize the use of a limited maintenance resource that you have in the factory, and do things in a timely manner.
So when we're in discussions with clients about where we fit into their sort of system architecture, is it a case of the client leads and we sort of fit in there, or is it more of a collaboration between Sensei would fit in quite well at this point, or a bit of both maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, so right now today, it's at Sensei, it's very much this cloud application, and we sit on that sort of northbound part of the architecture. So there's a lot of questions come about, do we actually connect through to PLCs and drives on the shop floor? Well, not really. We're the other side of the database from all of that. But what you have to be is flexible enough to work to the strategy and the architecture that the customer has created. They'll have invested a lot in that. There's a lot of different players, whether they're using very specific cloud platforms or more well-established and legacy data historians. We can't go around asking people to drop that investment and move on to a whole new platform. So we remain very flexible, and I don't think there's any two architectures between customers that have been the same. So, some of the same elements, but there's always a bit of a pick and mix going on there to build something that works just for them.
Exactly, and that's why it has to be flexible, right? You can't, it'd be great if it was like identical. Each deployment's the same, then it's all. And again, you just do it, cookie cutter. That's it. It's like a cookie cutter approach. But fact is, the flexibility is the power behind the platform, really. I wanted to touch back on the market again, actually, because I did write a question here, and as sort of head of marketing at Sensei, it's a bit of a strange question to ask, but in terms of some of the, you must have seen so many, there are a lot of competitors out there of various degrees. Some call themselves competitors, some brand themselves as predictive maintenance or not. But what are some of the big hype you've seen in the market that, is just, in your eyes, is just, nonsensical kind of thing? And some of the myths that come out from, it's obviously not naming competitors, but it's just some of the things generally you've seen talked about in the market, maybe. It's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of aspects where you think about these platforms that are providing, just generalized predictive analytics, and presenting it as, maybe organizations coming from the background of being, maybe cloud providers or connectivity providers, and then layering on some software that, you can bolt in some AI and ML, and then kind of leave it to you to figure out how to put all that together. Now, that creates a lot of issues as well, because then you're starting to find and try to pull together some resources that can build that technology, but these are relatively, scarce resources. There's and they're very hard to learn, right? You can't educate a lot of your existing maintenance and IT teams in developing AI and ML type solutions. Some other aspects is, you've got organizations that maybe have come much more from like a hardware perspective, using that hardware maybe in very well established areas where it's very detailed sensing that goes on to high criticality machines, but they're trying to now break themselves from the higher end of the market down. But it's very hard for them, right? Because culturally inside that organization, they're used to serving with high end and high capability sensing solutions that now they're trying to layer on software, but trying to break their thought process from having to have very expensive sensing to maybe utilizing data that maybe exists within the control network already. And some of those thought processes and cultures can be quite hard to change, and we see in some of those competitors. So they come from all sorts of different places, and there's companies that are purely developing IoT sensing and realizing they have to create themselves a market. So if you're developing some sort of IoT sensor that can capture temperatures, currents, voltages, or vibration levels on machines, your natural tendency is to build an application layer on top of that. But I mean, one of the things that we realized in the early days of Sensei is that we weren't experts in hardware, so we steered away from that. And maybe, these hardware companies, they maybe realize maybe they're not experts in software applications and the analytics that go with them. And this is where we've always had a very open partnership and collaboration strategy, and that's served us well. So we do what we do best, and we look to work with others that can help fill those gaps. Stories, obviously as we've moved into Siemens, we've got a lot of answers now for a lot of that connectivity and middleware and how do you get data from the shop floor to the cloud. But that still doesn't break our culture and the values that we work to say that, we've still got to be agnostic to data types and data flows from other solutions.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, so the benefit's clear is that we now have, obviously, a big backer in Siemens where we can, we can deliver the full stack solution or fill in some of those gaps if necessary. So there's a massive opportunity there. I see we're coming up to time. I know you've got to jump off another call, as do I. But so just to finish, could you, Rob? I know there's plenty within our customers, but provide like one example of real like big ROI from the scalability sort of aspect. And it doesn't. I know we've only got 2 minutes to say it in, but if there's anything that springs to mind, you can finish on a positive note.
Yeah, maybe try and steer away from some of the ones that maybe people have talked about in the past. But what we're finding now is that we're starting to make some big grounds with clients that have been using our system within things like steel production and aluminium, and now the expansion is moving now into other parts of the business units that deal with sort of the mining and refining of those, and that's because that the benefits have been seen in one business unit within the organisation, and now we're starting to get the pull that we'd expect to take us into those other business units. And the beauty is that even though it's been used in a mining or a smelting factory or a steel mill, it doesn't mean it can't work within a mining operation or a refining operation.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, is that word flexibility, isn't it? It's not tied to certain types of assets or certain areas of a business. It can let you, and that's the scalability aspect coming through again. So I think
exactly.
We've just about come to the end, but thank you everyone for joining. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you to Rob as well. Really interesting conversation. So that will be all for now, and we'll be back again very soon.